Welcome back to the Big Stuff Podcast. Kevin Brockley from Teenage High Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from Teenage High Sports Pennsylvania. We are back after a long Christmas break. And, Elton, it's interesting how things are shaking out kind of early in the Big Ten standings. Of course, you know, teams had the two conference games in December. We're into January now. And I think let's start with Michigan State, 4-0 in the league. They've won 7 in a row. They're back in the top 10. I think they're becoming the team we thought they would be in November when they went through some of those early struggles.
Yeah, well, you know, we mentioned at the beginning of the season the death of Cassius Winston's brother, the suicide. And you had mentioned, and I mentioned, you know, back at the beginning of the season, the impact that would have on him. I mean, that was his best friend. That was his brother. And for him to lose someone that important in his life was definitely going to have an impact on his emotional well-being. And it's looking like Cassius Winston is finally starting to heal from that and turn into the player that just made him a household name last year. And, you know, you could say that propelled Michigan State to the top of the AP rankings in preseason. He's really turned it on late, had a great 2-game stretch last week, and, you know, has Michigan State looking like it's the class of the Big Ten again.
Yeah, 32 points against Michigan, and certainly Michigan. Anytime Michigan State can beat Michigan like they did, that's got to warm the hearts of Spartan fans everywhere because that's a huge rivalry within the state. I mean, you look at them; they're leading the conference in scoring, 81.7, only giving up 64.1. So really, scoring margin too. They've got among the best, if not the best, scoring margins in the league. So they're really doing it at both ends of the floor right now. And I think that this is a signal. But, you know, this is typical of Tom Izzo teams. They kind of, you know, start out a little slow, have some non-conference losses. He challenges them in the non-conference. I mean, who schedules Kentucky to open the season, right, with the Champions Classic? And you learn and you grow from those losses. And, you know, that's a really sign of a well-coached program. And, you know, Tom Izzo has been around so long, there's no doubting that this guy's a future Hall of Fame coach.
Yeah, well, you know, he stacked that schedule. He front-loaded it for a reason. You know, you'd rather be clicking at this time of the year heading into your conference portion of play rather than the beginning of the season. We're kind of seeing the same thing with Ohio State, just on opposite ends of the spectrum. Ohio State and both Michigan got out to those great starts to the season. We're both ranked in the top 5 or top 7 of the AP poll, you know, or in November. And we look at both those programs now, and they're just kind of, you know, flailing at the moment. So, you know, I think that Ohio State has hit a wall. It's lost 2 consecutive games against West Virginia and Wisconsin, and lost to Minnesota on December 15th. It's still a very talented team, but the Buckeyes are really going to have to step out of this wall moving forward. The same thing with Michigan. I know they lost Isaiah Livers over the weekend. He did not play, which, you know, anytime you lose someone of his caliber is going to affect you as a whole. But Michigan's kind of in the same boat, kind of scrambling. They're looking like a much different team than the team it was in the Bahamas earlier this season.
Yeah, you know, and I think the thing with Ohio State, too, when you look at it, they got off to a hot shooting start, and their guards probably played a little bit over their heads early in the season. I think that's what's starting to catch up to them is the shooting. You know, the fact that and teams are going to go through lulls shooting the basketball. But I do think Ohio State with Caleb Wesson inside, you know, will eventually regroup and be, you know, a team that's going to contend for the league title. I just don't know if it's enough, you know, in terms of, you know, challenging Michigan State for the overall crown.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's another thing, and this is something I'd like to ask our guests, you know, in the next segment, but just how deep this league is. There's really a very slim margin for error, as we've seen, you know, last week with a couple of those teams losing, you know, as underdogs. But, you know, this conference was expected to be deep. I think it's even deeper than many expected it to be now that the season's kind of folding out. But like I said, slim margins for error, and you kind of have to be on top of your game each time you take the court if you want to be in contention, you know, for the conference championship here later on in the spring.
I'm looking at this league right now, Elton, and I see, you know, obviously 10 in the net top 50, and I'm seeing 12 teams right now that I think have the potential to squeak into the tournament. Now, will they? They won't. I think there'll be a natural attrition. I mean, I think the only two you look at are probably Nebraska and Northwestern at the bottom of the conference. But I think every other team has a legitimate chance to earn an NCAA bid between now and March. Will they? Probably not. but I could see this being a 9 or 10 bid league. Believe it or not, I think that it's that deep, it's that talented, and I think they showed that in the Big Ten ACC Challenge, obviously last month.
Yes, you look at the records, and 9 of the league's 14 teams have 10 or more wins right now at this point of the season. 2 of the league teams have 9 wins, so it's shown itself to be the class of college basketball right now.
Obviously Michigan State, the hottest team in the Big Ten right now with 7 wins in a row. Surprisingly, the second hottest 2 teams, Penn State and Rutgers, have both won 5 straight. So you look at that, and you were at the Palestra over the weekend. Penn State, Iowa, really a high-level game, entertaining, high-scoring game, ended up 89-86. First of all, what was that atmosphere like in Philadelphia, and how did Penn State manage to outlast Iowa, 2 ranked teams going at it?
It was incredible. That was my first visit to that historic gym, and it was everything that it said to be. Just very intimate atmosphere. I mean, it was crazy loud in there. It's about 80-20 for Penn State fans. So it was a road game, but it was a home game for Penn State. 3 of the players, Seth Lundy, Lamar Stevens, Isaiah Brockington, all played in that gym in high school. Lundy and Stevens won championships in there. Isaiah Brockington didn't. However, he came back on Saturday at a game in career, or a team in career high 23 points. 15 of those in the second half to lead Penn State to victory. And I think what really cemented Penn State fate in that game was its bench. It got a 46-point effort from its bench. You compare that to 8 points from Iowa's bench. I know Iowa had a few players who were banged up, but anytime you're that mismatched in any stat category, you're generally going to tend to work in your favor. And Penn State was able to withstand that game. Lamar Stevens, leading scorer, and it's the Big Ten's returning leading scorer, picked up his 4th foul at the 11:48 mark in that second half. Mike Watkins, who is the second half of that kind of thunder and lightning combination, really had a slow start of things offensively. He didn't record any points to the midway to the second half, and Penn State was still able to hang in there. That's thanks to contributions from guys like Brockington, Myron Jones, Curtis Jones Jr., the graduate transfer. And Penn State's really showing that it's getting it done by just having great depth.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think that's something Indiana is striving for. They're playing 10 or 11 guys, but they're not getting the same production off the bench as Penn State is, for sure.
Yeah, and that's something Fran McCaffrey, the Iowa coach, who is a Philadelphia native and played at Pennsylvania, had mentioned in post game. They were asking him we were kind of asking him, what's different about this Penn State team from years past, and he said the depth. He said any guy can go out there and get you 20 points, and when you're able to rely on something like that, you're able to have that type of production from your bench. It's just going to yield positive results in your favor.
Yeah, and it's really the second, when you have a second unit, you don't have the drop-off. I mean, that's huge. And, Penn State comes into a huge game against Rutgers this week. And Rutgers, they went up to Nebraska. They won that game. And, Nebraska, even though we've discussed their struggles under, first-year coach Fred Hoiberg, I mean, it still was a tough place to play. Purdue went up there and lost. And Nebraska also sent Indiana overtime. So, to me, that's a feather in Steve Pikiell's cap right now. That Rutgers right now 11-3. There's a lot of excitement there along the banks of the Raritan about the Scarlet Knights.
Yeah, and then you look, back in December, Rutgers was able to get a win against ranked Maryland, which is number 12 in the AP right now, and Seton Hall, which was ranked in the top 25 at the time, picked up wins against both of those programs. I'm very interested to see how that game tonight between Penn State and Rutgers is going to shape up.
Yeah, Caleb McConnell, 20 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. Johnson, with a big game as well, 18 and 14 rebounds. Miles Johnson, the center. Ron Harper Jr. With 11 and 10. Also, so you had 2 guys in their front court that had double doubles. Ron Harper Jr. is an interesting guy because we both remember Ron Harper Sr., who once was dubbed as the next Michael Jordan. He never quite panned out that way, but he was a terrific athlete and NBA player. And Ron Harper Jr., is a guy that is really doing it for the Scarlet Knights as well.
I feel really old right now, Kevin. Thanks for but Rutgers has been a surprise, feel-good story. And I'm not going to say feel-good story because I think that kind of diminishes Rutgers' season so far. No, Rutgers has been a good story for college basketball, and it just it further adds to the depth that this conference has.
Yeah, no question. And it's when you're looking at right now, Purdue right now is kind of struggling offensively, still trying to find their way. Illinois beat them 63-37. And, it's interesting. Illinois, loses to Michigan State and bounces back. I just think it's going to be that kind of a grind in the conference all year long. Indiana went on the road. They have their issues. They've trailed on the road in the Big Ten by 30 points in both their games. But they get Northwestern back at home this week, a chance to kind of right themselves a little bit. So I think it's going to be a big week coming up, and it's still a little early in conference play, and a lot's going to shake out. But I think teams, especially teams like Indiana and Purdue at the bottom end of the league right now, are going to have to show significant improvement just to kind of tread water in this league because it can be tough. It can be a league where you can get on a long losing streak in a hurry if you don't, figure some things out.
So you said as of now, you see about how many teams do you think have a chance at legitimately making the postseason?
Well, I think 12 teams will definitely make the postseason in some form, whether it's NCAA tournament or NIT. How many teams will squeeze into the NCAA? I mean, I think this could legitimately be an 8 or 9 bid league if things shake out a certain way, given the talent level. Because I think the SEC's down a little bit. I don't see them snatching up as many bids. The Pac-12 also is kind of top heavy right now.
Yeah.
The ACC are going to get teams in there. And there's some mid-majors as well.
Yeah.
When you look
Nathan's
around college
basketball. Really
basketball
well right now. Butler's playing really well.
San Diego State is still unbeaten, which is kind of crazy, right? So I have a vote AP poll, and I have them at number 12 in the country. So there will be some outliers. There will be some other teams in there in the mix, and that's part of what makes college basketball great, I think. What you don't have in college football in the playoff is kind of that underdog story outside the Power 5 conferences that can come up and sneak up and bite you. And Butler right now looks to be the best team in the state of Indiana as well. They're number 6 in the country, which is crazy. But Kamar Baldwin and Sean McDermott, they've really done a nice job recruiting and finding those hidden gems there. But I think with the Big Ten, it's a grown man's league right now, and I think it's going to be tough. But I still think Michigan State, as we started the podcast, remains a team to beat.
Yeah, I agree, and Maryland's sitting there on the cusp as well. I know Maryland had a couple of bad, well, I'm not gonna say bad losses, a couple of losses back in December. Penn State was the one who was the program to hand Maryland its first loss, and then Maryland also lost to Seton Hall, but they won back-to-back games. Bryant, Indiana. We'll see what Maryland's made of this week. They've got the Terrapins have games against Ohio State and on Iowa. And I think that will give us a better understanding of just, how thrilled this Maryland team is. I mean, it's a good team. I don't think anyone's, doubting that. It's ranked 12th in the country, has a really good backcourt. But, Maryland's inability to kind of, maintain that intensity throughout the season has kind of been in question. And we'll find out, where their medal is this week.
Yeah, and the interesting thing in watching that Maryland-Indiana game over the weekend, I wasn't there, but obviously I watched on TV, obviously, to follow the Indiana side, was that Maryland strikes me, and they allude to this in the broadcast, a slow starting team, a team that doesn't get off to a quick start. But, man, do they finish. They did
Maryland did the same thing against Penn State, back to I believe on December 4th, slow start through the first half, but, they really closed that gap there in the second half and brought it down to single-digit deficit. That's kind of Maryland's MO under Mark Turgeon.
Well, yeah, I would rather have a team that finishes well than a team that starts strong and kind of runs out of gas at the end. So I think that's kind of a good sign. You'd almost rather have it the other way. I mean, it does create some agita for your fan base a little bit, but if you can find a way to come through in the second half. Indiana's kind of had that opposite problem where they've gotten off to leads and they haven't been able to sustain them, even though they have the depth. For some reason, the execution in the last 10 minutes, be it nerves, be it whatever, certainly it was in their game against Arkansas. That proved to be the case. You're you're up 9 with 8 minutes to go, and you get outscored 19-3 the rest of the way. But it also comes down late in the game to getting stops too, defense as well. You got to really grind in, and when the shots aren't falling, you got to kind of grind in at the defensive end and find a way to make a play.
Yeah. Well, that's something that, Penn State, I watched a couple times this year has been able to do. It closed it out against Iowa in that fashion, and the same thing against Maryland. So, that's a difference maker.
That bodes well for Penn State in the future. Okay, and coming up, we will have Rick Bozich from WDRB Sports in Louisville. He covers Indiana as well and all things Big Ten. So we will discuss to him kind of the state of the Hoosiers and also look around the league in the Big Ten with him coming up. This is Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania for the Big Stuff Podcast. Welcome back to the Big Stuff Podcast. Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. And we are joined by Hall of Fame writer, USPWA Hall of Famer, who got his start at the Indiana Daily Student in the 1970s, covering IU during, obviously, the early period of the Bob Knight era. Then worked for the Anderson Herald Bulletin for a year. In 1975 and 1976 out of college. He's a longtime columnist in the Louisville, Kentucky area, and now is working for WDRB. Rick Bozich. Rick, pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thanks for having me on, guys. Always ready to talk college hoops, man. All
right, Rick, and let's start with Indiana. Obviously, their second straight road loss in the Big Ten where they trail by 30. It's an interesting situation. You get off to an 8-0 start, the 3-3 since. Archie Miller on his radio show yesterday mentioned the guard play, wants to see the guard play step up a little bit. I'm just curious, given the guards on this roster, whether you think that's possible, or is there a higher ceiling for guys like Al Durham, Devontae Green, Armand Franklin, the freshmen?
I think the key to it all is Rob Phinisee. I don't think there's any question about that. He was so good last year as a freshman before he got the concussion, and he never really totally recovered from that. And then this year it doesn't seem like he's ever been healthy and confident and assertive the way he needs to be. I didn't see the game against Maryland because I was covering Louisville, Florida State, but I did see the Arkansas game and he didn't start. And Phinisee, Trace Jackson Davis is their best player, but I think for Indiana to be its best team, Rob Phinisee needs to be the second best player.
No question, and Phinisee certainly stepped up in that overtime against Nebraska, hit a lot of big shots, had 16 points. But like you said, the injury issues have really plagued him. And you look at this team, Rick, and Archie's trying to play a lot of guys. There have been injuries, but he's playing a 10 or 11 deep rotation, but not really getting that kind of production off the bench that you would like, certainly from a scoring standpoint. Is it time for him to shorten his rotation, or do you think this is something that, he can sustain throughout the Big Ten?
Well, I think he would be willing to shorten his rotation if he got productivity from a few guys. I think he's a coach who's trying to find a combination that really works in terms of taking good shots, making perimeter shots, not turning the ball over. And, I think he's given opportunities to guys like Demezy Anderson and Jerome Hunter and Race Thompson and even Jerron Davis the last game, just thinking they could provide a spark. And I think he'll probably continue doing that until, I don't think 5 or 7 guys have really separated themselves from the rest of the guys in the lineup, and that's why it's been the way it's been.
Hey, this is Elton Hayes with CNHI Pennsylvania. Year 9 under Pat Chambers, Penn State's off to obviously his one of his best starts of his tenure. We knew in getting a guy back like Lamar Stevens would really help this team, and the add a guy like Mike Watkins would just kind of further round out that base. But we've seen 14 games into the season, the emergence of guys like Myron Jones and Isaiah Brockington have given this team some welcome depth. What do you think about that early season depth that Penn State has? I know against Iowa last week, Penn State bench was responsible for 46 points to Iowa's 8. I just kind of wanted to know if you could assess the depth that Penn State kind of carries on its roster right now.
Yeah, it's been impressive. I've been on board with Penn State for most of the year. I've been voting them in the AP top 25 higher than most people for a while, and been a fan of Pat Chambers. Penn State has shown something we'd never see in college basketball anymore, and that's patience with a guy. At almost any other program, especially in the Big Ten, he wouldn't be around this year, having not made the NCAA tournament, but they believed in him. And Penn State, I've mainly just watched them when they have played Indiana in the past, but they've always played Indiana tough, and they're a physical and a tough-minded team. And the thing I like about them is that they've got upperclassmen, and I really believe in today's college basketball that you're going to win with upperclassmen.
Okay. Well, after the game of the Palestra last Saturday, Iowa coach Fran McCaffrey was kind of assessing the league and said that, this is the deepest that, in his opinion, the conference has been. You've got programs like, Michigan and Ohio State last month fell to programs like Illinois and Minnesota. 5 teams right now are ranked in the AP top 10, in the AP top 25. 9 of the conference's 14 teams have double-digit win totals. I know you covered this league for a while, and I wanted to get your thoughts on, the depth of it this season and where it kind of stacked up to years past.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think the top of the league is probably as terrific as it's been in a few seasons in the past. I mean, Michigan State's starting to play better, so maybe they really are a potential number 1 seed. But I think that the gap between 1 and maybe down to 12 is pretty small, and I think a lot of games are going to be 1 or 2 possession games, and teams that can stay healthy and teams that can be resilient and not let 1 loss carry over into 2 losses, carry over into 3 losses will be the league teams that are successful. Mental toughness is going to be really hard this year because, you're going to lose games. You're probably going to lose. I think the winner of the league is probably going to lose at least 5 games. And, some teams can handle that stuff and some teams it causes issues. So I agree with that. Illinois is on the way up with Underwood. Minnesota and Richard Pitino has shown what they can do. Wisconsin has rallied from a bad non-conf three losses in a row in non-conference to be they went on the road 1-1 at Ohio State. Penn State's good. Rutgers is as good as it's been in a while. Maryland is good. The only team, even Nebraska, which was bad in the non-conference, has played decently. Then they beat Purdue, and then I know they took Indiana to overtime. So they're the worst team in the league, unless you say it's Northwestern. And it's 1 through 12. It's tough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mentioned Isaiah Brockington, my first question. He's a Philadelphia guy who began his career at St. Bonaventure, transferred, set out a year, and returned to the court this year. Now he's become a really productive sixth man for the Nittany Lions. He had 23 a team and career 23 high points against Iowa on Saturday. It's just been really emerged as a bright spot for this team. What are your thoughts on his role this season and kind of his journey to Penn State?
Well, I didn't really see him play much at St. Bonaventure, but I know that's been a strong program, and the A-10 is a good league, and that's a wise choice by Pat Chambers to get a grad transfer. It's similar to what Chris Mack's done at Louisville, where last year he brought in Christian Cunningham from Samford and Quan Four from Richmond, and this year he's got Fresh Kimball, who's also a Philadelphia kid from St. Joe, and hat tip also to Pat Chambers. He's really, I think that's part of the identity of Penn State basketball is Philly kids, because I'm pretty sure Lamar Stevens is a Philly kid.
Yep, Seth Lundy.
Tony Carr was a Philly kid. I'm sure that's tough going in to recruit with Villanova and the 4 of the schools in the Big Five going in there. But in Carolina, a lot of times goes in and gets Philly kids when they're really good. So hat tip to Pat Chambers for sort of establishing a little bit of his identity, and we're going to get some Philadelphia kids at Penn State.
Rick, one of the first things I did when I took this job last March was read an unauthorized biography on Bob Knight. It was by Mark Heisler, and you were quoted quite a bit in it, or referred to. And I'm just curious, as a student in the 1970s, what was it like to cover Bob Knight?
It's terrifying. I started I was a freshman in Indiana in 1971, which was the same year Coach Knight arrived, which was the same year Assembly Hall opened. I still have my ticket stub and my program from the first game, December 1st, 1971, against Ball State. I covered the team my senior year, and back in those days, Coach Knight would let the Daily Student reporter fly in the team plane, so I made 2 road trips. And that was Buckner and May and Benson and Wilkerson and those guys. And I guess my most memorable experience with him was one time before a Purdue game. And there's another book that Bob Hamill did, and there's a picture of me interviewing Knight at the time, and he was in the coach's room, which is just off the court where the visiting team comes off and on the floor. And they told me it's time to go in and see Coach Knight. So I went in and saw him, and he was sitting in a chair, taking his shoes off, and it was basically sending me the message like, I really have no interest in doing this, but go ahead and ask your question. And I asked him one question, and he kind of gave me a pretty nondescript answer. And the second question was about Purdue, that was the team they were going to play next. And he kind of twisted his head up at me and said, if you want to know about Purdue, get in your blankety-blank car and drive up to West Lafayette and ask Fred Schaus, because I don't give a shit about Purdue. And I was like, okay, Coach, thanks for your time. And that was the end of the interview. And, I've got a million Coach Knight stories through the years, and it'll be interesting to see now that he's moved back to Bloomington whether he actually does show up at Assembly Hall sometime. But, yeah, there's about 8 or 10 of us who were there for most of the big run, and we all have war stories.
Yeah, I was going to get to that because there's some rumblings that Ohio State, it might make sense because of the fact that he played at Ohio State, and it's this weekend, and there are some rumblings around town. He might show up there. When he was at the Bluebird last week, and he alluded to maybe showing up to women's basketball games. So of course I went. But if and when he does, step foot in Assembly Hall, how do you think he'll be received?
Oh, it'll be a prolonged standing ovation. I mean, I think there's a lot of fans. He's alienated some fans with his behavior really over the last, it's 19 and a half years by now, since he left, by some of the things he's done and said and through the years. But if he actually gets back in the building, I think the emotion for, the people that sit on the west side of the building, which are the season ticket holders, they'll give him a big ovation, and it'll be a huge moment. But I don't know. I've heard mixed reports from people whether he is actually going to come to a game or not, and I've heard the same rumors you have about this weekend. So I'm sure everybody's going to be on the lookout to see if he's actually there or not. He did go to the baseball game, so that was more than I ever thought he would do, and he's, as you know, he's big friends with Bob Hamill, who used to be the sports editor of the Bloomington paper. So if he shows up, I'm sure it would be with Bob Hamill. So keep your eye on that.
We will, Rick. Hey, well, look, we greatly appreciate your time and your insight. It was great catching up and chatting with you, and I'm sure you're tremendously busy this time of year because not only with Indiana, but you got Louisville and Kentucky is off to another good start. So we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kevin and Elton, and I'll see you on sound coming up for the Ohio State game Saturday, so I'll see you then.
All right. Well, that's Rick Bozich from WDRB. This is Kevin Brockway from CNH High Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNH High Sports Pennsylvania, signing off.